All right. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are back again on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And today's guest is probably one of the most appropriate guests we've had, given the title of the show. He's a great guy, an interesting fellow, and I found his book in a synchronistic, serendipitous way, of course, as it usually goes with this show. So without further ado, the author of The Alchemy of the Rainbow Heart Music, Drew Hempel, joins us on the show. Drew, welcome to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. You have done a compliment or given me a compliment by listening to multiple episodes of the show and commenting. And so thank you for your participation. And, that's not a lot of guests do that. So I just wanted to take a moment to say I appreciate you and your book. So for my audience who might just be learning about you for the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself, your YouTube channel, your work, and anything else you'd like to share before we get into this conversation.
Okay, well, thanks, Mark. And I hope I'm safe with you so close to Skull and Bones, and hopefully it's they don't track me down.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I'm just your basic Minnesota guy, which Minnesota is somewhere kind of around Michigan and Wisconsin, and for those on the East Coast, I know it's kind of hard to keep track of the Midwest, but we typically have very cold weather, so we're kind of extremophiles in terms of comfort over fashion, as I'm sporting my protection against the electromagnetic radiation. And anyway, yeah, so just grew up playing lots of music from a young age. Went to a church school and got into church music, but also played in the noise punk scene and jazz and just, roots reggae band down at the main room where Prince filmed his Purple Rain movie. And anyway, then I went off to the East Coast for my first year of college and ended up getting a master's degree studying esoteric music, and that got me into some deep philosophy of science. So I mainly correspond with professors on the internet, and I read lots of science. But I did a lot of activism for my master's degree. I did like research policy work, so I wasn't like a big fan of the university. But I did get my degree and then went right back into activism work and kept doing research. I read one scholarly book a day for 10 years. And then when the big crash happened in 2008, I just left the big city. I've been doing regenerative agriculture ever since, growing mushrooms in the woods and waiting for the civilization, watching it collapse. And doing energy healing. Do a lot of like I do a free live stream every night. Um, so I get a few people that join in with that and practice, do a bit of meditation. But I ended up training with a guy from China who did serious full lotus cave meditation for 28 days nonstop around 1995. And he said when he came out of it, he levitated up 9 feet. When he was in full lotus meditation, he spiraled up next to a pine tree. And from everything I've experienced with that guy, I have no reason not to believe him. So,
Wow.
yeah. And so that's was a life-changing experience. He said, I had an enlightenment experience. And then his teaching assistant is an African-American guy, Jim Nance, and he's just having his first book published, his memoir published that he asked me to help him out on 20 years ago. And he was like a kung fu master in the 60s in the black community. And then he was a professional basketball player. And he was tapped into sort of like spiritual powers through his martial arts training in extreme sports. And then he was told to study Aikido or QiGong in the 60s, and he didn't know what that was. But then he ended up meeting Chen Yulin, who's the Qigong master from China, in like 95 and became his teaching assistant. And so then, yeah, I was able to help him out a little bit. And so he's finally having his book published this March.
Right
So
on.
I'm happy to plug his book because that's going to be really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. I'm a martial artist myself, and I can attest to the connection, the spiritual connection that sort of grows in you when you really dedicate yourself to that practice. So Wow, fascinating. So it sounds like you have dedicated yourself to music mainly, and that is a big part of your book, and it is in the title of the book. But when did you sort of get this idea about alchemy and where it intermingles with music? Like, take us through the beginnings of the alchemy of the Rainbow Heart music and how this sort of began.
Well, the teacher I studied with, the Chinese guy, he says the simplest is the most powerful. And what happened is that I was taking adult music theory when I was about 15 or 16. In Minneapolis in the 80s had a really big music scene, and I was just totally immersed in it, and I didn't even realize it at the time. It was like the for a fish in the water type of thing. And I noticed a logical error in the music theory, like on the mathematics, there was a logical error. And my dad was a prominent lawyer in Minnesota. He went to school in the East Coast and all that, and he was like a chief deputy officer for the attorney general here and stuff. So, I grew up taking logic really seriously. Like he would talk super slowly because every word counts, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I pointed this out to I was studying with a former university music professor, and I pointed this out to him, and he's just like, no, no, it's logarithms. The answer is logarithms. And I'm like, yeah, but I've trained in, music. I didn't talk back to him, but I'm just thinking on my own, like from my experience in music, because I started training from a young age. And I didn't know that music rewires your brain if you start before the age of 9 on a music instrument. If you study seriously, it increases your corpus callosum, and that integrates the left and right brain. But anyway, I just knew from my experience that this logical error was something, and I kept it to myself, and then I ended up taking quantum physics my first year of college, and the guy who taught it, he taught us non-locality, and he taught us by doing something that he called the Dirac dance, which is he's like, pretend you're holding a wine glass like this, and he's like, now go like this, and you can't spill it. Whoops, I just spilled it. Anyway, uh, I'll just
Do you need to
pretend I'm doing that,
do you need to
and
clean
then you
that
go
up?
like this. You go like this with your hand,
Right.
and then you flip it around like that, right?
Right.
And voila, you haven't spilled a drop.
Theoretically, of course. Yeah.
At any rate, he just started laughing at me because I had this like that, slack jaw look that your buddy Sam Tripoli gets when he's listening to you, like, like, oh my God. But anyway, because I realized that this was the same logical error that I had discovered in my music theory, and I'm like, wait a second. And I even wrote a letter home about it because I was just that geeky, like, gee, mom and dad, And any rate, I kept it to myself because I'm like, how am I going to connect music theory to quantum physics? That's just too weird, right? And and then I ended up getting my undergraduate degree, and I started out in music, and then I got kind of kicked out of it for because I had these strange views, and then so I ended up doing my master's thesis on this idea about music, and I was connecting it to philosophy of science and energy healing and stuff. And it was in liberal studies, which is kind of like a self-directed. Liberal studies was like the old school philosophy, like natural science, natural philosophy back in the for the aristocrats. Now that they try to. There's this guy Morris Berman. He's a liberal studies guy. He left the U.S. I think he's like it's falling apart. But at any rate, yeah, so I'm trying to cut to the chase here, but basically, this guy was going to publish my master's thesis, and he's like, I'm going to promote it. He wrote books on music and physics. So, and then he's like, I can't really understand what you're trying to say, and he had a degree in physics, and then so I read his book, and he had a book called Music and Fractals, right? And he said that the yin yang symbol is not a fractal because it's got complementary opposites, so it's not symmetrical mathematics. And all of a sudden, I realized that's the error in my master's thesis because I had read some work where some scientists were saying, well, if you have logistic equations, that's the same thing as the tai chi or tai chi, as they call it, the yin yang symbol. So I had put that in my master's thesis, and I realized, no, no, that's the error that I was wrong about, because this original logical problem, it has to do with symmetry in the mathematics. Anyway, so at this point, all of a sudden I got my I had done a lot of activism, and I saw the corporate control of academia, of professors and whatnot, and I just was so disgusted with my personal experience. Like, I had my email was all deleted, and like I was being, I hate to use the word targeted, but like when you get an email from a professor saying, "I will personally make sure you're never published in the Minnesota Daily," because we had 50,000 students at the university, and I was a paid columnist for
Mm.
the student paper, because I wrote, because of my activism, that I got hired. Anyway, at any rate, I said, "Well, okay, I'll finish my master's degree if I can do this um, directed study in qigong meditation," because I took this spiritual healing class, and I had I had seen a poster on the wall for a qigong master, and I was so skeptical. I called up the number on the one that, back when they had telephone poles with posters on them, and I could hear the Chinese lady in the background going, "Yeah, you can get 50% off," because that's what I was asking for, being a poor student or whatever. And I brought my girlfriend at the time, and I was super healthy at this time, and I could feel. She said, "I'm going to fill the room with chi." And it was at St. Mary's University in Minneapolis, and I felt this really strong magnetic field. She's like, "I want you to try making chi balls," and it was pushing the palms of my hands apart. This really strong magnetic field. I'm like, that's really strange. And I was like I said, I was young and healthy, and then pretty much everybody was gone, and the security guard wandered in the room and said, "I'm just wondering what's going on in here, because the fuse in the room behind you got blown." And the way she said it, like, she wasn't saying it for effect. Like, the qigong master didn't even say anything in response, because what do you say to that? Like, "Oh yeah, I blew the fuse," and I didn't know, I wasn't like practical at all, so I didn't know that that's like probably at least 12 amps, maybe 15 amps, but I was definitely kind of freaked out, and I left. And then I ended up going to San Francisco the next summer, because I had some workers' comp money, just like $600, and I could afford the plane trip. And I had a buddy live in San Francisco, and his parents are from Taiwan, and he's like, "No, qigong, that's for old people," and I, because that's where this lady lived, FEP Chow. She had a healing center out there. But he took me up to Portland, and we went to Paul's bookstore. I don't know if you heard of that. It's like a famous used bookstore. And I found this book on biosonics and music by this guy. He has a PhD in, like, I don't know, like psychiatry or something, but he does this biosonics healing with, with the tuning forks. I know you've interviewed a guy who does that, right? Or he's got his own podcast show and all that. Any rate, in that book, he says, well, it had the same exact music theory secret that I had discovered in high school. This simple, really simple concept. But he's like, if you understand this concept that the perfect fifth is yang in Taoism, the perfect fifth is music tuning. You got the perfect fifth, and then the perfect fourth is yin. And I'm like, that's the same exact. That explains this energy healing that I just experienced. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a second, now we're off to the races, so to speak. And so and then I started researching it, and writing it down, and I did it. That's how I pursued it in graduate school. And then I had a housemate, and she had studied with this guy this other Chinese guy who spoke at my class. She's like, yeah, I did meditate with him, and I had been researching qigong at that point. I'm like, he seems like he's the real deal. And I had read this one book by a Harvard medical doctor. He went to China. It's called Encounters with Qi, and he experienced a qigong master doing telekinesis, moving something at a distance. And I'm like, this guy looks like the guy who could do, telekinesis. And then, so the first class I took was in 1999, and it was at a university, but he taught through a community college. And he's like, okay, we're gonna do moving of yin and yang, and you basically just stand and move your arms back and forth with your eyes closed. He's like, I'm gonna do the Shaolin fingers, and you might hear my fingers shaking, because our eyes are closed. He's not touching us or anything. And I hear his fingers shaking. All of a sudden, I see this really bright yellow light, and I feel just this immense love, in my heart. And I leave the class, and my girlfriend picks me up, and she's just a real knockout. And I'm thinking to myself, dang, like I can't even explain to her. I tried to tell her, and she's like, well, maybe my mom can be healed from that, whatever. And at that point, so I finished my master's degree doing intensive meditation training on my own with this guy, taking his classes. And every time you walk into his class, he's doing healing on you. And so at the level 3 class, he taught what he calls it's called Bigu in Taoist QiGong or Neidong is internal alchemy, and Neigong is the martial arts. And so he's the Bigu is fasting, but they call it energy feasting. It's not like normal fasting because you're meditating the whole time. And so being a nerd, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to be, the what are they called, the teacher's pet or whatever. And so I started fasting ahead of time, and I had these amazing, like I felt really strong heat in my kidneys, and then my thymus got really hot, and all of a sudden the center of my brain got really hot, and then the top of my skull got soft and started pulsating with this electromagnetic energy. And I like in 8 days, all I had was a half a glass of water. That's it, not like per day, but just the whole time. And I needed less sleep. I only needed like 5 hours of sleep, and I had more energy. And my bones felt super limber and pliable and supple. And I'm like, this, I can't, this is. So then I drive to the class, right? And it's a weekend retreat, and there's maybe 100 people there. It's at a Christian retreat center in the woods. And because he worked with nuns and stuff, and there was this guy in the front of the class, and I was in the back, and I could barely stand in the stand to be in the same room with him because there was this stench of rotting flesh emitting from the guy, and nobody else seemed to notice it. But I had been fasting all week, so my energy was super purified. And then the qigong master goes, he sits in full lotus when he meditates, and he's like, qigong masters can smell cancer, and it smells like rotting flesh. And I hadn't talked to the qigong master at all. I never. So I'm going, okay. And then as he does healing in the class, and the smell went away, the rotting flesh smell. And then I saw these yellow lights coming out of the top of his center of his skull while he's meditating. They were shaped like humans, and they would form out of his skull, and then it would break off and then would float out to each person being healed in the room. And I'm like, holy smokes, that's how he's doing his healing. He's literally creating these spirits that go to each person to be healed while they're meditating. And then um I didn't say anything to anybody about any of this. And then all of a sudden I see these lights come floating in from outside the room, and we're out in the woods, right? And they're the same thing. They're yellow. They're each shaped like a human, and they're hovering around him while he's meditating in full lotus. And then he says, again, I'm not saying anything to anybody, and I'm just astonished. And he's like, since somebody can see this, I'm going to explain what it is. That's what he says. And then he goes, those are dead people, as spirits that they come to me regularly to get healed, and I heal them. And now what's interesting is part of my research, I was reading all these meditation books or whatever, because I'm finishing my master's degree, so I'm not like a total dimwit. And one of the books I got through Interlibrary Loan was the most famous Buddhist monk of Thailand, and his name's Fra Archon Moon. And I know you've had on the occult Thailand guy or whatever, the Thailand
Yeah, Peter
Nagas
Jenks.
and what. Yeah, I worked with the Burmese refugee community, so I've had some personal experience with the similar, uh, you know, like I won't go into details, but at any rate,
Well, I
but in
will
the,
say,
yeah,
just for your
certainly.
sake, I'm captivated. You're great at this, and just take your time and keep going because I'm at the edge of my seat, and there's no need to self-deprecate because you are on the money with a lot of this stuff. So keep
Okay,
going.
so now basically in that book, he had described the exact same thing where he was able to read the minds of his students, in the class and know what they were experiencing. He also healed ghosts regularly, in this book. And also, what else? Oh well, I should like preface it by explaining my this was the level 3 retreat, right? So the level 2 retreat, he teaches self-healing, I think it is. This was like 20 years ago now, because I did this in 2000 when I trained it 25 years ago. And he said in the level 2 class, he said, I can see what percentage a person's organ is functioning. So if you want to know what percentage your organ is functioning, you can come up and ask me during the break. Now, in that class, I had felt some heat just in my right kidney, and I thought, well, that's kind of strange, because I'm not, normally I don't notice those kind of things. And so I thought, okay, I'll take him up on his offer, and I'm standing in front of him, and I said, well, can you tell me what percentage my right kidney is working? And he's standing in front of me, and he looks at my right kidney, and right when he looks at it, I feel a laser just on my right kidney, and it's like this burning bliss. And he says, about 75%. And I'm so shocked that I'm just like, wow, thank you. Okay. No, so at the level 3 retreat, I'm thinking I'm, hot, you know what? Like I'm fasting, and I could smell the cancer, I'm a qigong master or whatever. Like, so I go up and I'm like, um, during the break, I said, well, what should I do? I asked the qigong master. I didn't tell him I've been fasting for a week, because I know he goes, well, let me read your aura. And then all of a sudden he gets like this blank look on his face, and then he comes back out of it and he goes, well, keep your mouth closed while you're meditating. And I see, in my following his instructions, he tells you to breathe out of your mouth at first to expel like the bad air from your lungs or whatever. But after that, you're supposed to keep your mouth closed with the roof. And I had only had a half a glass of water the whole week, you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, okay, well, he's probably also saying, don't talk about what you're experiencing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's probably like this Zen double entendre, because that's what. But at any rate, now things get strange after that. Like, we went we went back for a break. I finally went back to my room during one of the breaks, because it's a weekend retreat. And this gets a little weird, but this is the whole Eastern thing. You got to go with it, right? So I'm sitting in my room in full lotus, and at this point, my legs are kind of hurting, right? Because after a while in full lotus, it's painful, right? Like the Padmasana, you get your feet up on your thighs. But because I can feel this strong electromagnetic force like filling my whole body. So I just make the sword fingers and I point them at the center of my feet, and I go like this. And sure enough, the pain's gone. It just clears it out. And I'm like, whoa, this is nice. And then all of a sudden, the smell comes back, the rotting flesh smell. And I could hear the room next to me, this guy and this lady are getting down. And I'm like, oh, dang, he doesn't realize, because he's a Westerner. And he just got all this magnificent spiritual healing. But the thing is we don't understand that that's connected to celibacy, like it's a whole body thing, right? So, and he must have come there, with this lady, and she's like, yeah. And I'm thinking, how can she even be with the guy in the same room? Because I can smell it through the wall, the smell of rotting flesh, but they're getting down. They have no idea. And his cancer has come back, and he doesn't even know it. Because, if you're a Westerner, you're learning these things, but you don't know it's based on serious, strict discipline, right? Like the whole Southeast Asian monks, they're not supposed to be touched by females. That's part of their, being a monk or whatever. Of course, in Taoism, you got, Tantra and all that. Any rate, so I'm like, okay, this is getting weird. So, and then when we finally go for lunch, I'm still fasting, right? And the Qigong master, he sits next to me at the lunch table, and the other guys are eating. And I'm thinking back on that, And I'm like, wow, that was really cool. That he decided to sit next to me because I'm sure he was like, I got to keep an eye on this guy, like. And at any rate, I go back to my pad, and I'm by the university. I'm on the West Bank where like Bob Dylan used to play music. It's like this hippie scene, and by the university, it's like all hippies and anarchists and gutter punks and all that. That's my scene. And I had some really bizarre things happen for the next couple weeks, but I experienced uh, energy healing at a distance through my third eye, but it completely caught me off guard because I couldn't process it. I couldn't like intellectually understand what was going on because I didn't understand that the energy will just shoot out of your eyes if you don't do certain techniques to control your energy. I didn't know this at all. And so that led me on a journey. The final thing I experienced, I did, he's teaching you how to do healing. So I did some practice healing, and I was still fasting. I go up to the house because I was practicing on my mom. I drive up to my parents, and I had done a healing on her before, and she's nice about it. She couldn't really feel anything, right? Well, this time she felt this strong. I could feel a strong magnetic field coming out of my hands, and I could feel she had a liver blockage. And she's like, so you haven't had any food in like a week? And she just starts screaming and screaming, because that's like she's my mom, right? So I stuff a bunch of food in my mouth. Okay, can I still do the healing on you? And then she she got really sleepy and she laid down, and I kept healing her, and then I left and drove back to the city. And then I'm like, oh, that really sucks because I worked so hard. You know what I'm saying? Like fasting and meditating. And I just got screamed at like the worst I've ever been screamed at in my life. And I was pretty sensitive, because I'm and yeah, so she calls me up 2 weeks later and she's like, I don't need to wear my smoker's stockings anymore because she had these like surgical, like your circulation isn't good anymore.
Yeah,
She's like,
blood
I don't
thinner.
need to wear those anymore.
Yeah.
And she said it's the difference between night and day. And she said, can you do another healing on me? And I said, well, I've stopped because I got yelled at so badly. She's like, well, you're just being lazy, and, typical. Like, at any rate, that was one of the things I experienced. Another thing was I experienced a space-time vortex, and the room was spinning around me, but it wasn't like normal dizziness. It was literally like felt like space-time spinning around me. And I'm like, I got to find out what this is. And that freaked me out so badly. But when I came out of it, I'm like, all I know is I'm who I am. It's not my body and not my mind, but whatever this energy is. And I went to my favorite bookstore. It's an academic bookstore, but they have all like the new age stuff and all that. They have everything. And they know me because I'm always in I'm the bookworm guy. And I go down, and the first book I see on the shelf, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna see. And it was Sri Chinmoy, and I had never read a Sri Chinmoy book. And I pull it out and I open it up, supposedly just randomly, right? The very first thing I read is a student asking what causes this spinning, sensation from the energy. And he's like, oh, that's just the Shakti, the cosmic Shakti. That's what he said. That's the cosmic Shakti. And I'm thinking, wow, what are that's just weird. Like, what are the odds that but it still wasn't good enough. I'm like, okay, that doesn't really explain what happened. And I didn't realize it, but I had been studying this book called Taoist Yoga, Alchemy, and Immortality, and I had found it in that same bookstore. And that book's like a training manual, So you go chapter by chapter, and as you're going, you're progressing. And what I experienced was actually in chapter 11 of the book, but I had only really studied the book up to like chapter 5 because I'm thinking, that's how far along I am. So I had no idea that book itself was the only book that had the real details of what had happened to me. And then my own teacher, he said at one time he was healing too fast. and he had the same experience, this dizzy, it's the emptiness, what they call the emptiness in Taoism. So it's not just like proprioception messing with you or whatever. And he said he had to ask one of his advanced students to teach his class while he meditated to recharge his energy. And basically, I was doing this environmental activism because to me, it wasn't separated from the whole, as you say, environmental awareness, you know? And I wasn't making any money, I was working paper shuffling, like literally paper shuffling. That was my job part time. So I could read a scholarly book a day. And so I couldn't afford the classes anymore because I had graduated at this point. And I just kept trying to sit in full lotus because I'm like, okay, full lotus, that's the most advanced level, right? But I didn't realize that you got to still stick with the foundation because you start out doing standing exercises, and you really got to keep doing that in order to ground your energy. What I did instead is I just sat in full lotus like as much as possible, even in public. So I was having all these energy experiences, and I just burned off all my energy that way doing that. And it was interesting experience because I validated, like in traditional Chinese medicine, the different emotions are a different organ of the body. And so I was able to experience that directly. Like, for example, I was sitting in Burger King, just not to change the subject. And I'm sitting there reading one of my scholarly books, I'm sitting in full lotus. And this guy walks in. I just, how you like glance up when you're reading, in the booth, and we make eye contact. And he's a real big Native American guy. And there's in Minnesota or Minneapolis, it used to be also called like the urban reservation because there's a large Ojibwe population that lives there in Dakota. And at any rate, as soon as we make eye contact, my liver starts getting hot, and because I quick look away. You know how you make eye contact with a stranger and you just kind of look away. And I'm like, he must still be staring at me. And he's got his tray, he's looking for a place to sit. And I can feel my liver getting hot and hot. I'm like, that's anger. He's angry at me. Or he's just angry in general. There's some serious anger. And I was kind of like freaking out. Like, I'm not going to look at him, just keep reading my book. But while I'm reading, I'm in full lotus having this energy experience at the same time. So as my liver gets super, super hot, the energy builds up in my body. Then it goes up through my heart. And then it goes out the back of my skull through the pineal gland, which is like the third eye, but that's the organ of the third eye. And it's going out the back of my skull. The chi is going back. So I realize he's sitting behind me in the booth, against the wall behind me. And as the energy keeps going out of my pineal gland through the back of my skull, then my liver gets less and less hot. So it's like taking that liver energy, it's transducing it up through the heart, like first down through the lower body, then up through the heart, then out through the pineal gland, out into him, you know, through the back of my skull. So finally, my liver's nice and cool, and I feel better. I'm like, okay, great. But ostensibly, the whole time I've just been reading my book. I'm not looking up or anything. I'm just reading while this other thing is happening through my right brain. I'm not talking or anything. I'm just reading. All of a sudden, I notice somebody's coming up on me at my booth. And I look over and, he's a real big guy and he's looking down on me and he just says, thank you. And I'm thinking, okay, he's a total stranger. I never said a word with him. We just made that quick eye glance. And now he's thanking me. I'm like, this is just way too weird. And the other weird thing about it is that what I was doing, this kind of is actually like psychic healing and is using what they call yin chi. And the yin chi was actually going up the front of my body, which is the opposite of alchemy. In alchemy, the yin chi is supposed to go down the front of your body. So when it goes up the front of my body, I'm also bringing up all these impurities in my own body. I didn't dare say a word to the guy. So I could feel impurities like leaching out of my gums and stuff. Like this is like really weird stuff. I just smile at them, and I have my tea tree oil with me because tea tree oil is like antiseptic, because I'm eating like junk food. I was on this scavenger diet at this point. I'm like a crazy hermit, reading a scholarly book a day and literally like eating out of dumpsters and riding a British 3-speed year round, internal hub. I didn't I didn't have to do one repair on that bike, and I rode it. Minnesota, I mean, the winters are harsh, right? And I weighed 50 pounds less than I do now. So I was in really good shape. And I didn't know it at the time, because it's an internal hub gear. I never had to do any maintenance. So that was my lifestyle for 10 years, like that. Experiences like that all day long with ostensibly with strangers. And I had other people thank me. Some people did other stuff. It was just me sitting in full lotus and seeing what happens and reading books. And then that's how I wrote the 2012 book you got right now.
Right. Right. So there's quite a journey that preceded this book, and I already can sort of glean some of the ideas that I've read about through what you've just told me. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear it, and really fascinating to hear your firsthand experience with qigong, because it's a topic that I don't talk about much on the show, but it is one of my main interests. But sometimes I feel like it's difficult for people to perceive these things through a podcast, and you're doing a great job
Mhm.
at telling these stories. I'm fascinated. So when it comes to these yellow human shaped light bodies that were emanating from the mentor that you had,
Yeah.
does this connect to this concept that you talk about in chapter one, where our modern mentality creates ghost people? Like, is this kind of this idea
Yeah.
that people are trapped in this, sort of liminal space, not quite
Mhm.
dead, not quite alive, and it's due to their maybe modern indulgences and other things like that that kind of keep them stuck in the earthly realm? Is that sort of what you're talking about there?
Yeah. Okay. I got a couple things to relate. That's a great question. Thank you. And one of the stories that Chen Yulin shared. This is the qigong master, and he works with the Mayo Clinic. So he works with Mayo Clinic doctors. He's not like officially, endorsed by the Mayo Clinic, but he works with individual Mayo Clinic doctors. And one of them, he co-wrote a chapter for a Mayo Clinic textbook on, complementary healing. So I went to the University Medical School library and I read his chapter that he co-wrote with Dr. Nisha Manik, and she actually had a book. She came out with a book recently. But at any rate, he told this story how when he first came to Minnesota from China, he was doing healing and he went down to the Mayo Clinic to teach qigong to the elderly people down there because I don't know, it's a famous hospital and he a friend took him down there and there was these huge spirits, these ghost spirits, but they were like warriors and they were gigantic and he had to be super careful to be respectful of them while he's teaching the class. And then afterwards, he's like, "What happened here? Something happened." And that's how he found out that Rochester, where the Mayo Clinic is, that was the largest mass hanging in U.S. history of the Dakota, warriors that had done an uprising because they were starving, because they were promised food for giving up all their land and all that, and they'd been cheated by the local traders and whatnot, and the government agents, and so 1862 there was a big uprising, and I don't know all the details. I mean, I write about it in the book, so I have the details there, but yeah, so he actually saw these ancestors that were, and then he's mentioned since then that when he does healing in his classes, that there's other ancestors that help him, like energy masters or whatever, that help him with the healing. And sometimes they use the word angels. Both he and his assistant, Qigong Master Jim Nance, said that angels have helped them do healing. But on the flip side of that is, Westerners like Qigong Master Jim Nance. He's like, Chen Yulin said I had an enlightenment experience, but one of the effects of that is there's for about a week you're confused. You're like it even says it in that book, the Taoist Yoga Alchemy and Immortality book. You have a state of dullness for a week because it's the enlightenment experience is that reality is neither inside nor outside your body. And so that's why they have all those Zen paradoxes. And so at any rate, as a Westerner, like his Jim Nance, he meditated 12 hours a day in full lotus. He did that for, I don't know, 20 years as Trinity Lynn's assistant, doing energy healing. So I'll tell a story just to give you an idea of what we're missing out on here. I think it was like 2002. I was taking a QiGong class because I tried to keep taking them when I could. And I was living in a cheap room I was renting. And I hadn't had any food yet that day. I just biked out, rode the bicycle out to the class and fasting, try to purify my energy. And we're doing full lotus meditation. And it's a small class and it's just me and Jim Nance. And he's still in full lotus. And he's like, I'm going to go upstairs because it's the QiGong Center. And I'm going to keep meditating in full lotus. And so, I'm like the plucky white boy, can I join you? And he said, well, maybe later, because he's a big guy and he's the teaching assistant. So I'm like, oh, cool, maybe later, if I keep practicing. And so I get on my bike, I go home. And at this point, I'm hungry. So I grab a bagel out of the dumpster and go up to my room and I keep going to full lotus and keep meditating. All of a sudden, the center of my brain just gets super, super hot, like a laser. And I'm thinking, is it the full moon? Because Qigong Master Trinity Lin, he says, meditation is 10 times stronger during the full moon. And I've experienced that. And I'm like, no, this is way, way stronger than the full moon. And it got so strong, like this laser in the center of my brain, that I just had to stop meditating. And then I kind of forgot about it. And then the week went by and I biked out to class again. And the class was down in the basement. And as I'm walking down the hallway, all of a sudden, Jim Nance, he steps out of the hallway right as I'm coming down. He turns to face me and he says, did you feel anything? And all of a sudden, I'm looking at him and I remember him saying, maybe later. And I'm like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, holy smokes. Like, when he said maybe later, he didn't mean, like I'm sitting with him physically. And I couldn't say a word. And he just looked at me, he turned around, he goes back in the room. And then 10 years later, uh, I hadn't taken any classes since then for 10 years. I think I took one other class. And I got a story about that class too. But any rate, he was offering, Jim Nance was offering free Friday healings. Like you could come in and get a sample healing. And at this point, my mom had needed healing at this point for something else. And she was on medication that was making her worse. So I'm like, well, let's just try it. At this point, she's like, sure, I'll try anything. It's free, right? So we go in and yeah, I reminded Jim about that story from 10 years earlier, what had happened. And he said, well, at first, when he did long distance healing, he used too much energy, because my brain felt like it was a laser, like in the center of my brain. It was just on fire. Another time, that same time when I was hanging out with him at this point, he got a phone call for somebody to do healing, to get a healing from him. And so I stepped outside because this is at the QiGong Center, and it's just us two there because it's after hours. And somebody, I think they had cancer or something, and they needed healing. I don't know what it was, but I come back in. We had been sitting at this small little table together, chatting about his energy healing. He traveled in Africa for a couple of years and went to over a dozen countries in Africa in the 80s studying shamanism. And so when I came back inside, I sat across on the other side of the room because nobody was around. And I'm talking to him and I'm telling him a story like I'm telling you. And it's about this documentary I saw on Netflix, and I thought he might be interested in it. And all of a sudden, the center of my brain just is on fire. It's heating up like a laser as I'm talking to him. I'm trying to ignore it. and then it just shoots down to my heart, and my heart opens up, and I just start bawling, and I'm supposed to be like, you're supposed to be a man, and I'm just like, what are you doing to me? And I got tears coming down my face, and he's just looking at me like not saying a word. And then later on, he said, well, because you sat on the other side of the room, it was easier to heal you. Now, that's one of the ironies, one of the paradoxes of this, if you're like an energy master healer, is that when you're up close with somebody, you pick up the more superficial blockages. But when you do long distance healing, it's easier to just connect to like their core and do a deeper healing. And it's hard to believe unless you experience it. And so I got one phone healing from QiGong Master Chen Yulin, but the rest of the healings were in his class. But then one time I went in person and I got a healing, and that was in 2015. And at that point, he said, your mind is very powerful from years of meditation. And, because it had been 15 years at that point, and I haven't seen him since. And he's very expensive at this point. He's built up his own business, and people all over the world that get long distance healing and take his classes online and stuff like that. And so, yeah. So basically, I have a bunch of stories like that, but yeah. So what I'm getting at is that Jim Nance, the assistant, because he was hanging out with me one on one for a couple of years. And he called because I'm like, I can always feel this magnetic bliss in the center of my brain. And when I focus my mind, I can intensify it. I used to call it flexing the pineal gland. And then like the skeptic scientists are like, well, you don't have any muscles in your brain. You can't do that. Then I realized, oh, that's my spirit. That's because each of us have a ghost inside of us, you see? And so I realized that that's what I'm doing when I'm able to just focus my mind. That's actually my spirit doing that. And then Jeanette's is like, well, that's your brain blockage. He's like, because he's like, you fell out of enlightenment. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So he calls that my brain blockage. But on the other hand, one time, I don't know, he was telling me about another person, and I blurted out something about the person because I had been with the person. Because I wasn't thinking like I like to just speak truth when I can, like whatever, just come. I'm not. And he's like, I read the person's energy again, and you were right. And so that gets into this problem. He said that the person had a problem with their dad, the way they were raised. And what I've noticed after my enlightenment experience, it was literally like you go out in the world and it's the veil has been lifted or whatever you want to call it, like you've left the matrix kind of thing. Um, I could read people's in what they call intention. Like when you were talking to David Way, he uses the word intention. That's a very important word in Taoist training. It's called EYI, and what I call it is the magnetic moment of the virtual photons in the body. That's my scientific terminology for it. But like a lot of what happens sometimes is that, like if males experience abuse before they finished puberty, it gets hardwired in their lower body. And this is what is colloquially called the psychic vampire. And they're literally able to feed off other people's energy and then use it just for their own materialistic, you know, expelling, so to speak. And that's what they do. And people have no idea it's happening to them. After my training, I realized that these guys that I had been friends with, these older males, a couple of them, they had this problem. This was their character. This is who they really were, not their personality, but this is what they were really up to. And so then, I was sitting in full lotus, as I've told you, I was just sitting with them, hanging out in full lotus. And at this point, I could send energy. This is just a psychic energy again, what they call yin chi. And the way to describe yin chi, it's like a electro. When you listen to music and you get tingling, like the chills, that's what it's like internally, and then externally, it feels kind of like that too. And so it's related to the life force energy in the blood. And so I decided to see if I could change these guys, as for healing. I just thought, well, they're friends of mine, so I'll just see what happens. And I realized I couldn't. They would just waste the energy. As soon as I filled them up with energy, they would literally just go and waste it, like right in front of me. Like it was terrible. And so then I finally discovered in my research, I have a free training manual. That is another doc droid. Anybody can get it. Um, and I found 7 different references in India and China. And they say that teachers won't teach this secret because they don't want their students to be able to store up the energy, necessarily, unless they know that the student has the morality to really control the energy properly. But the secret is flexing the sphincter, the anal sphincter, which is terrible. But the thing is that people on that low level of frequency of spirit, that's literally where they're trying to take the energy from, is that level in the body. And it's all just holographic. Like you interact, like with my eyes open, we don't realize, but there's when your eyes are open, the yin chi goes up the front and out your eyes. If you flex the sphincter, you can stop that from happening. You can hold because you store the energy in your second brain, which has more neurons than your heart. And I go into all the whole, psychophysiology stuff in my training manual, but I had to go deep into quantum physics, and I had I've been studying quantum physics for 30 years or whatever, and I ended up corresponding with this one professor several times, and he knew I wasn't a scientist, but he read one of my music papers. He said, "I love your music paper," and that was just that. But he worked with David Bohm. You've probably heard of David Bohm. So this guy's name is Basil J. Hiley, and he was Bohm's collaborator. And Basil J. Hiley, he's in his 80s now, but it turns out, see, I don't want to get into the science stuff because it gets really complicated really easily. But it's on the other hand, I'm like, okay, I gotta figure out the science to this, otherwise people are just gonna dismiss it. And it turns out there's this thing called non-commutativity in science. That's the term for it. And even the term, it's like, okay, non-commutativity, you know, that's gonna turn most people off right there. But there's this guy, he got the Fields Medal in mathematics, and most people never even heard of the Fields Medal. It's harder to get than the Nobel Prize in physics. Um, and he has this talk on YouTube called "Music of Shapes," and it's the exact same music secret that I figured out in high school. He's the only one who's figured it out, and he said this is the truth of music, and it's quantum non-locality. It's all about quantum physics. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just some guy, on my own. Like somebody must have figured out this is the secret of meditation, also this non-commutativity. So I'm searching the internet. I'm like, okay, there's got to be somebody out there somewhere. Searching and searching. Sure enough, Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. It's a top physics lab. There's a guy there named Eddie Oceans, and he's been hired to research what he has coined as quantum psychology. And he says he also teaches Wing Chun at Stanford. And he says the secret of all the internal martial arts training is non-commutativity. And it's the same. And not only that, but he cites my physics professor, Bernstein, the first physics professor I had. He cites that guy and he says it's all due to this Dirac dance, like this. So now it's like, okay, I've connected the music theory secret that I found to the quantum physics, to the meditation, and the all the training details. Like he's saying, like, the outside of your hand is yang, the inside is yin, the upper body is yang, the lower body is yin. Your left eye, this is for males, like it's different for females, it's all. But the left eye is yin qi, but it's yang shen. The right eye is yang shen, or yang qi, but it's yin, or wait, sorry. See how confusing it is? like there's a whole ancient science to this, you know. So yeah, so I at this point I'm like, okay, I figured it all out, right? Like, and I even got somebody donated for my research. So I was able to really take a deep dive and I wrote another book about it. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to submit this to an academic journal because I got my argument, got the references, and I just like a missive, you know, like a I just threw it out there and I didn't use the proper formatting, but I had all my sources in there. Submitted it to this philosophy of science journal. And I'm like, I've tried this before, it's never worked, you know, I just forgot about it, right? And then literally a year later, I get this email and I just deleted it because I'm like, you know, it's another rejection from another academic journal. And I'm like, okay, well, I better go into my trash and just read it because it's good to learn from people critiquing you, you know. So I'll go into my trash, I'll just read it and see what they say about why they didn't publish it. And sure enough, he's like, no, you've been accepted for publication. I'm like, wait, you know, and then um it turns out that he sends me the peer review because it's an actual peer review article, you know, a journal or whatever. And his professors like I looked up everybody on the editorial board. They're all legitimate professors. And they're like, how come you're not citing this one guy? That was their main critique. I'm like, who's this guy? And he was this physicist from Hungary. Well, it turns out he was teaching in Minnesota the year I was born, and he published a book that same year, and he had a whole chapter on how auditory perception enabled the true understanding of the physics of reality. And it was all about, you know, based on the same. He didn't quite have the exact same thing, you know, but it was enough to corroborate my claim, you know, that there's something different about listening that enables quantum biology to access this whole other simple yet very powerful transformation. That is the secret of alchemy. And and yeah, like I said, I'm a bookworm, so I've had libraries like your library back there. I've had like 4 libraries like that where I've read every book and gotten rid of the whole library and started it up again. You know, and that's all I do is I don't read as much anymore. I read mainly online. So
Hmm.
and I use like one of my readers in England, he's like, you can use Sci-Hub. There's this website called Sci-Hub, and the lady who created it, she has to be in hiding. And she's like from I don't know, somewhere off of Russia. I can't remember what state, but um if you use Sci-Hub, you can read any peer-reviewed article.
Mm, mm. I'm
Um
familiar with Sci-Hub. There's another service. I'll tell
yeah.
you off the air because I don't want these things to blow up
Yeah, I
and
know.
then people can't use them
They're trying
anymore.
to track them down. It's
Well,
not
the
like
trouble
but
is
yeah, you can tell me something different. Yeah.
the trouble is, you know, we go and talk about it on the show, and there's plenty of well-meaning people who will use it, but unfortunately, there's also a bunch of people who will go and use it and not maybe securely access the site, and then that kind of traffic. I just don't want to be responsible for that. Let's pause for a second, Drew, because what I'm noticing, and this is all so fascinating, I have a bunch of questions for you, but what I'm
Yep.
noticing is every now and then the connection sort of buffers a little bit, and I miss like I'll be able to understand what you're saying, but I don't want the audience to, you know, be upset. So I think one of the things we should do